Dialogue of contemporary social and cultural issues which affect an evolving and emerging Indian American community committed to preserving the vast customs of a vibrant cultural heritage.
Hello and welcome to Darshan America. Ramesh is off this week. My name is Shilpa Alimchandani.
And I'm Aastha Verma. And of course, the big story this week is President Barack Obama's State of the Union address, which is made quite an impact. Of course, people were expecting him to highlight certain key themes in his speech, including the economy. He also talked about his 5 pillars, which is of importance. A couple of interesting things to note about this particular speech. One, he used the word investment rather than spending, which got a lot of buzz for people who are interested in politics because, of course, spending has such negative connotations associated with it. Investment makes it sound like you're thinking about the future, which certainly President Obama is. The other thing that was interesting is seeing the Republicans and the Democrats sitting together, which, of course, was a gesture of unity, especially after the tragedy that happened in Tucson, Arizona. And I think the Republicans needed to do this because they have been appearing so much to be partisan and anti-President Obama's policies. So this at least gives them the show of unity, and of course they have a very different Congress. So this is all shaping up to make for a very interesting re-election campaign, which has already gotten off the ground.
Exactly. 2012 is not so far away.
No, it really isn't.
And we're still trying to figure out what we're going to be seeing in the Republican Party in terms of candidates, leadership, who's forming exploratory committees to talk about where they're going to run and you know, what support they have.
It's going to be a very interesting race right here in Virginia for one very big reason, and that is this week, former Governor George Allen announced his candidacy to run against Jim Webb for the Senate seat in Virginia. This is quite important because many of us have not forgotten that 5 years ago when Governor George Allen was running his race that he lost to Jim Webb. He was actually caught on film using a racial slur, macaca. It happened to be one of our reporters from the Indian community that caught him on camera using that word. And unfortunately, that not only sunk his race for the Senate, but it knocked him out virtually from running for the White House, which was well within his sights. So I wonder now if this is a re-election bid, not just for the Senate seat for George Allen, but down the road if he's really angling for that White House.
Well, I think he's counting on us having very short memories and forgetting that kind of comment, which clearly we haven't because we're still talking about it several years later. I'm not sure how far that exploration for a presidential bid will really go for him. I think I myself have my skepticism about that. We even heard Newt Gingrich saying some things about possibly forming an exploratory committee, talk about a retread, a blast from the past.
Mitt Romney is back in the race, too. And that's the thing, you know, the Republican Party really isn't coming up with any stellar leadership on their end. They either have very incredibly polarizing figures like Eric Cantor, John Boehner, Newt Gingrich might be among that pool as well. But then you have the retread factor. You've got Mitt Romney coming back into the race. And who knows, maybe Mike Huckabee will throw his hat in the ring too, which would look a lot like the 2008 election that we went through. But the other part of this whole election season is the influence of the Tea Party. For one, you saw State of the Union. You not only saw a Republican rebuttal by Governor Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, and then the informal one that you saw by the Tea Party candidate, who they're making their selves known, from Michelle Bachmann, who is representing Minnesota. So, I mean, you have clear influences, not just from the Republican Party, but a very separate and distinct movement from the Tea Party.
Right. So if we're looking for something new on the right, I suppose you could say that new idea and new way of approaching things is coming from the Tea Party. And, of course, they have, you know, their popular candidates in Congress right now, many of them first-time congressmen and women with this new Republican wave that's taking over. Many of them have famously been carrying around constitutions in their pockets, in their handbags, saying how important it is to stick to the principles of the Constitution. That's what they're all about. And I just have to say, as a resident of the District of Columbia, I would like to remind all of our Tea Party candidates and elected officials that District of Columbia residents do not have voting representation in Congress, which is, in fact, unconstitutional.
And they pay taxes.
They do. We have license plates all across the district that say taxation without representation. And if you will, remember during the Revolution, that is exactly what the Tea Party was about, right? It was those colonists living here in America who were protesting the British government's taxes without having any kind of representation in the decision-making and in the government. So, as a D.C. resident, I would just like to remind all of those Tea Partiers to stand up for D.C. voting rights, because we have no one in the House of Representatives or in the Senate that represents our interests. So when we get all these calls, like, if you believe in this cause, or if you want your congressmen to vote a certain way on a bill, on health care, on immigration, on anything, the environment, lobby your congressperson. Well, guess what? Our delegate doesn't even have a vote. So just a little reminder, I had to throw that in there.
I'm really glad that you did, because one of the things I would like to see is for President Barack Obama to take that license plate. It was something that President Bill Clinton put on his presidential limo to remind everyone that D.C. did not have voting rights. And it's something that President Obama has not yet done. So I would like for him to embrace that movement as well. Moving on, folks, this is a story that's just kind of sad. It came out of the Wall Street Journal about the U.S. Post Office's decision to close many of its post offices across the country. This is because they have a budget shortfall. They just simply cannot afford to keep these post offices open. Add to that the fact that we just aren't mailing letters like we used to mail because of email and the internet taking over a lot of the day-to-day mailings that we would otherwise do. But the impact of this is really much more severe than economic. This article talks about how a disproportionate number of these post offices are located in these rural communities. And so these rural communities are small towns where these post offices were often the center of town. And in fact, the town center was defined in many cases by the post office. So by removing these post offices, some of which have existed for 100 years, you're not just removing the historical significance that that building represented, but you're taking away the town center. And in many of these rural communities, you have the elderly that rely on postal service who aren't using the internet, and they now have to face a greater inconvenience of having to find another bigger town to go to send their mail supplies. Now, the post office has said that they will continue their deliveries, but they just will not maintain those facilities. But what I see here is it's a natural progression away from the rural community towards the urban centers. And it's almost as if the post office is prioritizing those urban centers and not caring so much about connecting those rural communities to each other. And that's what the post office did. It was the